It's tall. I don't think I'm up. I don't want to. I don't want to adjust it for. I don't want to. We adjusted it specially, but you can hear me, can't you?
It's picking you up.
Oh,
yes.
just.
No. Yes, we're fine.
Tēnā tātou katoa, and welcome and thank you for joining us this evening for this really fantastic talk on the early history of the Manawatu Gay Rights Association, MaGRA, before it became MaLGRA. A very warm welcome to Vernon Tilley. It's my privilege, I'm delighted to be able to welcome you here to the Palmerston North City Library and to be able to introduce you for this really wonderful talk as part of our Heritage Month program. So if you don't have one of these, do grab one and have a look at it. There's a lot happening. Vernon has played a major role in the gay rights movement since 1973 and had a major role in the establishing the association in Palmerston North in 1977. Vernon is Palmerston North, born and bred, and Samoan, so it's really delightful and wonderful to be able to have this evening with him here back in Palmerston North. So thank you, Vernon, and I'm sure we're going to have a really interesting talk. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jenny, for that warm welcome, and kia ora tātou, greetings, and thanks to you being able to make the brave effort to come out on a Friday after a long week at work, so thank you for being here tonight. There are some acknowledgements I'd like to make at the very start of my talk. Firstly, I'd like to express my thanks to the Palmerston North City Council, the City Library, Manawatu Heritage and the Manawatu Evening Standard for providing the opportunity for this talk tonight about the early days of the Manawatu Gay Rights Association. I will be using the term gay community to apply to what is nowadays known variously as the rainbow community, the queer community, or LGBTI+, etc. Gay community was the term applied to my community, our community, some of your cases, during the time period I'm covering in my talk before the description changes. Historically, gay has been a common in-house term and word used in the USA from the start of the 20th century by the gay community to describe themselves, although ironically in one sense, but with a kernel of truth in other ways. From the 1960s, obviously, it became the worldwide term applied generally to my or our community. I also would like to acknowledge that I am going to use full names of people that are on public record as being okay with that or are deceased. For any other people, I'm using just the first name basis. The other acknowledgement I'd like to make is, sorry, no, it's fine. Palmerston North City Library is an appropriate and at the same time a poignant venue for this talk. The building that we were in was completed in 1928 for the Ross family business, CM Ross Limited, or as it was more usually known in my time as a child in Palmerston North as Roscoe, even after it was sold to Milne Choice in 1959. Charles Ross, the founder of the company, was the great-grandfather of Michael Ross, who I will be mentioning in my talk. Michael made this comment to me in an email on Sunday from the USA where he now lives. Dear Vernon, talking at Roscoe, now I love that coincidence very much. It's a building that is very familiar and very dear to me. So this evening, I will be covering these 4 topics. Over 50 years ago, in 1972, a number of extremely out and courageous and heroic forward-thinking members of the New Zealand Aotearoa gay community set up the Gay Liberation Front, firstly in Auckland in March of 1972, then followed by Christchurch in May 1972, and later on by Wellington in July of 1972. This collective of gay individuals began the fight for the absolute removal of all discrimination against the gay community, the fight for absolute equality for the gay community, but also within the context of our previous gay community history, society and culture, for the sexual and personal freedoms of the gay community. At the same time, these brave individuals from the gay community standing forward, they were fully aware that this public and open political and social activism for the most despised community in this country could, and in some cases would come at a great personal and social risk to their lives. Palmerston North provided 3 individuals who participated in Gay Liberation Front from the very start. Paul Kells and Michael Ross from 1972, and myself basically from 1973. Paul Kells, like myself, went to Palmerston North Boys High School. His father was a prominent lawyer in the city with the firm Kells and Cruden. Paul joined the Auckland Gay Liberation Front at the very start of it all in 1972, and in fact he was right in the midst of it all. In 1973 he was the unpaid sex liberation officer of NZUSA. Paul Kells is pretty important because, I just need to get the right slide. He's pretty important because on the 17th of April in 1972, Auckland Gay Liberation did the first ZAP action in New Zealand Aotearoa. A ZAP is a form of political direct action designed to embarrass a public figure or a public organisation. John Denmouth and Paul Kells and 2 women who we don't know the names of, they applied for marriage licences for 2 men together and 2 women together at the Registry of Birth, Deaths and Marriages office in Auckland. The application was eventually refused. A pamphlet was produced for that ZAP that covered marriage supporting the nuclear family and so being a symbol of oppression to gays, as well as calling for equal rights on the issue of same-sex marriage. So that was an action that was done very early on, and Paul Kells, a member of this community, born and raised here, was a very obvious part of that ZAP. In terms of Michael Ross, he was a member of a well-known established family in Palmerston North, the Ross family, and Ross Intermediate, and the suburb Rosslyn are named after his great-grandfather, Charles Ross. He joined Gay Liberation Wellington in 1972, and when Gay Liberation Wellington split amicably in 1973 into the 2 groups, Wellington and VUW, Victoria University, he was the first president of Gay Liberation Victoria University. The split was done deliberately to enable the Gay Liberation organisation in Wellington to use university facilities, because the VUW group could apply for society membership and get access to the facilities of Victoria University. He was the main media spokesperson for print, radio and television over 1973 through to 1975. Over that same period, Michael was also the secretary for the New Zealand Homosexual Law Reform Society from 1974 to the mid-1976. Another important thing that he did was that in April 1973 he sorted out the 15 Wesley Road flat in Kilburn, Wellington, which was used for Gay Liberation meetings and became basically known as Gay Liberation House in Wellington because of its activity in terms of holding meetings there, and also because a lot of the leadership of Wellington Gay Liberation went through that flat at one time or other as flatmates. Michael is still overseas. He's been there since 1976, but he's also well known internationally for his academic research on the issues of gay men and also AIDS, HIV. The other person was me. I was raised in the working class and states housing areas of Palmerston North, Awapuni and Takaro Highbury. Through me, Palmerston North also provided the first and only Pacific Islander involved in gay liberation for much of the 1970s. My parents were the first interracial marriage of a Samoan and a European in New Zealand, and through that matter of luck and circumstance, I was the first half-caste Samoan born ever in New Zealand. There are a few more of us around these days. So in my last year at Palmerston North Boys High, I joined the Homosexual Law Reform Society. I joined Gay Liberation the next year in 1973, and between 1973 and 1980, I was fairly well an activist in the gay liberation organisation in Wellington and with VEW. Regarding 15 Wesley Road, I was a regular weekend visitor there from 1974 through to 1977, and I was a flat member for 2 lengthy periods. So that gave me the chance to meet a lot of the leadership of gay liberation in Wellington, Auckland and Christchurch. But more importantly for the Manawatu, because of my involvement, I attended the meeting to set up the National Gay Rights Coalition in Wellington on the 8th and 9th of 1970, on the 8th and 9th of January 1977 on behalf of the Manawatu. Michael Ross was my first boyfriend from June 1974 to 1975, so it was a classic tale of somebody from the poor side of town meets somebody from the better side of town. And it was through our relationship that I was introduced to the 15 Wesley Road flat and got me more directly involved in gay liberation in Wellington, and also to meet the leaders, as I said, of the other main centres. The very first coming out media article for the gay community in New Zealand Aotearoa was in the New Zealand Listener of 6th of August 1973 with the ironic title of Is Being Gay a Reason to Be Glum? Now that featured David Gaynor, Paul Kells and Michael Ross, and as Michael Ross stated in an email to me just on Tuesday, 2 out of 3 for Palmerston North in the very first coming out event in New Zealand Aotearoa ever is not a bad score. And for me, on a parochial basis, it's not too bad at all that 2 of us out of the 3 came from Palmerston North Boys High School, but Freiburg High School was still high on the medals table because of Michael's work in gay liberation in the gay community. So as you can see, I'm very interested in the individual people that make up organisations as well as the lives of organisations themselves, which is what I'm about to cover. Over the years, through my involvement in the gay community and looking at 300 years of our history, it's very clear that even growing up in a place like Palmerston North, that these 3 principles still apply. The gay community is always generally ignored and cut across class, ethnicity and racial lines. The gay community has always been intergenerational outside of the traditional nuclear family or extended family to pass on our culture, society, history and values. And gay community relationships, and this was brand new for me back in 1974-75, but gay community relationships that end usually result in a friendship being developed from that end of the relationship. And that's been my experience for 50 years, that people I've been with, we are still friends because we've got that link. And that is something that outside of the gay community does not happen a lot. Okay, in terms of trying to get a gay liberation group underway in the Manawatu, in 1973, a student at Massey University did try and get a group underway, but nothing happened. However, Gay Liberation Victoria University Wellington, which had about 40 members, did have 4 members from Massey University. And this is the written documentation that's the written documentation there that quotes how many, and that was a letter to me from Michael Ross. Now the 4 members were Stuart Ransom, there was another university professor, and there was an American couple, John, who was doing his PhD in soil science at Massey, and his partner Vernon, another Vernon. So that was 1973 in terms of just a group of people that did meet, but they joined Wellington Gay Liberation, the Victoria University branch, and did not set up a group here in the end. In 1974, there was a group set up, and it was the Gay Liberation Massey University, and it had about half a dozen members. And this is the documentary proof of that. And that was the other acknowledgement that I forgot, that I did not have in my notes, that I did intend to say. Everything that I am quoting has got a second person to confirm it, or there is written documentation for everything that I'm going through. So the members were Stuart Ransom, the other university professor, but because of confidentiality, I can't say who it is because that person had a family and there were still children and grandchildren of that person. The American couple, John and Vernon, were still at Massey, so they were involved, but there was a visiting American professor of geography, Herman Berkman, who was at Massey doing a Fulbright US scholarship on urban planning. So, and there was Michael. So they were the 6 people plus me. There was another group that was set up in the Manawatu, and it was called SHE, and I think it was the Society for Homosexual Equality. And I need to check with the 2 people that have been named for it a bit more detail. Michael Ross said to me the interesting thing in 73 and 74 was no lesbians seemed to be involved in the Massey University group in 74, and nobody applied from Palmerston North or Massey University to join the Wellington Gay Liberation Front or the Victoria University branch of it. His explanation for it was that most lesbians were more involved in the women's movement, and that's where their energies went, to try and explain why did nothing happen over those 2 particular years. Because after that, after 1974, that was not the case. So in 1975 and 1976, there was no formal organisation in the Manawatu. There were various groupings of lesbians and gay men and 1 transsexual. That overlapped, and there was still the informal group of the Massey University personnel. People met in the club hotel upstairs, and that was a mixed crowd. There was the Manawatu Theatre Society that had a number of gay men and lesbians involved in that, but not involved in some of the other areas that I've already covered. Obviously there was the public places in Palmerston North, just like in every other city for gay men. The Palmerston North sauna on Broadway was also a bit of a meeting place, and that's where the Aberdeen on Broadway is now. And there were definitely private parties, and 5 Dahlia Street, the corner of Dahlia Street and Princess Street, is a very common party place over that period, 1975 and 76. And that's from having been to a lot of the parties there, and I did flat there for about 3 months. So that's a bit of the background. So now we come to 1977 and 1978, which is where I'm going to concentrate on in terms of the Manawatu Gay Rights Association. I consider that 1977 was basically the year of getting established for MaGRA, and 1978 was the year of consolidation for MaGRA. The 23rd to the 24th of October 1976 is where the Gay Liberation Conference occurred, and it was in Wellington over that period, and that's where it was decided to form the National Gay Rights Coalition. The National Gay Rights Coalition was established at a meeting on the 8th and 9th of January 1977, and that was a meeting of representatives of gay organisations in New Zealand, Aotearoa, and some individuals. So my participation and involvement at that meeting was on behalf of the Manawatu. So this is, the slide that you see is calling for the establishment of the NGRC, which is what it became, and also what was delegated to be done in preparation for that meeting. This slide is the letter that was sent to me by Judith Ems, who was elected as one of the officials for getting the NGRC conference organised for the 8th and 9th of January 1977 and playing a role in getting things organised for it. In that letter she basically said that we don't have anyone in Palmerston, can you let people know in Palmerston that it's on, and if you can't get anybody there, we need you there. So this is just showing you again the physical evidence for what I'm saying to you tonight. And then she wrote that personal comment at the end, if anybody in Palmerston North contacts us, can we direct them to you? And of course the answer was fine, yes, that would be fine. Now I was allowed to participate on behalf of the Manawatu at that meeting on the expectation that I would set up a gay group in Palmerston North in 1977 when I went back there from Wellington after the university holidays to do the last year of my degree at Massey University. Which I did do. I followed the instruction. So, March 1977, Setting up the group, getting it established, and the group continuing after I finished my degree at the end of 1977 was the absolute priority for me. Therefore, because I'd seen a few problems in other groups, and there was also the whispering campaign in the Manawatu about the vested interest in why are you setting up a group. So therefore, so that no one could suggest that I had ulterior personal motives for setting up the gay group, I abided by the rule that I set for myself at the start of 1977. No relationships with anybody at all in Palmerston North. I had Wellington to fall back on. This rule was the correct thing to follow as far as I was concerned, as there were suspicions about this being a possibility as it occurred in some other groups earlier, and there was a bit of a whispering campaign in the Manawatu as to why you're setting up the group, why people previously wanted to set up a group. Following this rule for myself meant there was trust and confidence by others in me that I was serious about getting an organisation set up in Palmerston North, and that they, more importantly, should be serious about being part of it. Pretty tall order for a provincial city in New Zealand at that time. So, setting up the group was an event that started with a definite hiss, and there was also a definite roar. Massey University had a capping week function, which was a dance called Pro Pufta, where the males dressed as puftas, sissy gay men, and the females dressed as prostitutes. So for the 1977 capping week, it was held at the Awapuni Motor Hotel on Pioneer Highway, which is now a supermarket, and that was on Monday the 28th of March at 8 o'clock. So this is the hiss part. I got a large placard written up stating Pro Pufta continues gay oppression. I walked from home in Mariner Street down to Pioneer Highway and picketed the Pro Pufta dance for about an hour and a half from 7:30 with my sign. And the next night was the first meeting of hopefully setting up an organisation. However, so that was the feedback that was in the Tribune. When the people organising Capping Week from the Massey University Students Association were interviewed about it, they were asked what was the most intriguing aspect of the Capping Week, and they said it was the mad gay liber picketing, the Pro Pufta dance. And that the photo I showed you earlier of myself was me getting me from 1973, about the time I got involved with gay liberation. And this photo was from my student ID, which was taken 3 weeks before I did the solo picket. Okay, so that was the hiss part. Now, the roar didn't start off with a roar. So the next night after that Pro Pufta picket, coming back to that, my view was, how can you actually set up a gay rights organisation on the Tuesday night and let that opportunity go by and not do anything? So I thought, I'm going to be labelled a hypocrite, so I've got to do something. So that's why I did the Pro Pufta picket deliberately, so that when I had the meeting the next night, I didn't have some smart aleck pointing out, there was a Pro Pufta dance, did you do anything about it? So that was the thinking at the time, and that's why I did what I did. So the next night after the Pro Pufta picket by me, at 7:30 on Tuesday the 29th of March in the Kiwatia Lounge upstairs at the Massey University Student Centre, I had the first meeting. And that's the sign that I put around. That was one that I kept. And the one that I kept deliberately because it had emblazoned across it, gays don't have any rights, and I thought it's pertinent to keep that one. And there was nobody there but me, the initial disappointing start of one solitary individual, and it was felt that the potential group would never get off the ground. However, the roar did arrive, as over the next 2 months and 3 more meetings later, the group had been definitely established, the Manawatu Gay Rights Association, and it had, by the end of that 4th meeting, the failed first one and 3 subsequent ones, we had over 20 members. Promotional work was being done, inquiries to the phone, contact and the post office box that we'd already set up within that 2 months were being answered by phone or mail. Social activities were being organised in Palmerston North, a gay library was being established, counselling and welfare groups were given direct contact with MaGRA, and the group was also in close liaison with other groups. So that is the change from that very first failed meeting. 3 meetings later, that's where we were at, and that was within 2 months. And the evidence for that is my report for chaff that you can see was June the 1st. It's interesting that the phone number there was my home phone, that was my parents' home phone number, so I was still living at home. And some people had some interesting conversations with my mother who answered the phone before I got to it. And that's been a bone of, that's been a source of ribbing from some people even today, saying, "You stupid person using your home phone number," and us having to deal with your mother. So by June 1977, MaGRA had firmly established itself in the Manawatu, and it had consolidated and organised itself very quickly, that one could see that it had a definite future as an effective body serving the needs of all gay people in the Manawatu. MaGRA also got involved in political issues at Massey University campus. We sent people along that were able to go to meetings on the right to abortion. We also attended human rights bill meetings at Massey, so this is all in the first 3 or 4 months. And we even wrote articles for chaff on those 2 issues, for example. MaGRA had its first political success when MaGRA was able to get support for changing Massey University Student Association policy in July 1977 to support sexual acts between consenting persons 16 years and over, and that they should be free from legal restrictions, and also that the Musa dance Pro Pufta be replaced by a fancy dress function during the capping week, since Pro Pufta as it stands continues the oppression of homosexuals and women. So that was our first political success, so that was done by the end of June. A letter from Des Bovey, who's quite prominent in the Wanganui gay rights group. At the time that we were set up in 1977, he was down at Castle Hill in Springfield, but he was quite often up in Wanganui, and he attended both meetings in Christchurch when he could get to them, but he also came to a couple of meetings in the Manawatu before he wrote this letter to me. And this gives you an idea of what MaGRA is like, and it gives you an independent assessment of MaGRA meetings in that first 4 months. And what he wrote was, "I fronted up to the Gaelic meeting here in Christchurch. It was okay, worth the trip in and out, but the meeting lacked the enthusiasm of Palmerston North." So that, I think, gives you an idea of how those 20 members were activated, getting on with things, as you can see from the list of things that they were able to do, certainly within that first 2 months, and that continued from there. Okay, what I want to do is just look at some sections of MaGRA over that 2-year period, just to give you an insight into how the group operated. For most of 77, we actually operated as a collective. We didn't have held positions. We trusted each other to use each person's strengths to do what needed to be done. Now, I've thought about that recently. Why did I insist on it being a collective and not go through the traditional route of president, secretary, treasurer, and a committee? Reason is because the people that came along to it wanted to run it that way and agreed with me, and lots of other people who came from Palmerston North and weren't at Massey, who joined MaGRA, I'd known, and there was that fellowship and trust with each other. But I have subsequently thought about recently that a lot of it had to do with my father, because he was the most important Samoan in the Palmerston North community from 1954 right through to the 70s. And he knew he had the power, he knew he was the most important Matai, but what he wanted to do was run it as a collective. So there were 3 Samoans running things as the leadership team, but they had a view of democracy where people had a right to say things and things were agreed by a vote or by consent or by generally everybody agreeing. So he ran it sort of as a collective. And that's where I got the idea to run MaGRA, and it worked. But obviously, things don't always go that way and you go down the traditional route. But certainly for 1978, even though they had a committee, I know that the 9 people that were running it still ran it as a collective, even though people had various assigned positions. So MaGRA meetings were held fortnightly generally. They were always both business and social. The meeting day in 1977 tended to be Tuesday, and they were either at the Massey University Student Centre or in people's homes. Very early on in November, we got a constitution sorted out, and that was accepted unanimously, no dissent. In 1978, the meeting schedule was changed to being every first Wednesday and every third Tuesday of each month, so you can see the fortnightly pattern of meetings continues into 1978. And the venues that were used were the Commercial Hotel that was on the corner of Main Street and the Square, Barry's Salon, which is upstairs at 12 the Square, which is the commercial building next door to this library, or in people's homes. And there was a social event, but there was also business, and they brought in outside speakers, lawyers, Palmerston North Samaritans, Youth Line, as well as general group discussions on topics of interest to MaGRA. In terms of subscriptions and membership, I think in 1977, people just contributed what was needed out of their own pocket to run things. There was no subs. But in 1978, it was decided we need to have things a bit more formal because we had a constitution. So the 1978 subscription rates were, as you see, for members it was $4, and for Friends of the Association it was $2 per year, and they were entitled, as Friends of the Association, to attend 4 group meetings. And you can see 4 group meetings is quite a small number of meetings when you're having meetings every fortnight. And by September 1978, there were 49 members and 8 associate members. So I think from those membership numbers, you can see that in the space of just over a year and a half, things were well and truly established. In terms of finances, in October 1978, in order to cover themselves from being liable for any debts or misdemeanours of members that may occur with the organisation, MaGRA applied to the Registrar of Incorporated Societies to become a member, and that happened. To give you an idea of the money that was flowing through MaGRA within the 2-year period of its existence, in the 4-month period from July to November 1978, there was expenditure of $310, income of $355, and in the bank to run things, they had at their disposal about $470. So that's a pretty reasonable base for an organisation to be operating and to survive. In terms of social activities, in 78 it was the Commercial Hotel that was the basis of meeting up, both lesbians and gay men, and also George and Valerie. George was the trans person that was a member. Initially we met at a back bar downstairs, and then the person who was the main receptionist, Craig I think his name was, said, oh, you can use the bar upstairs. So we started using the bar upstairs fairly shortly after using the Commercial Hotel as a venue to meet on Friday and Saturday nights. There were invariably lots of private parties, various groups organised to go as members to concerts and theatre, so there were organised outings, organised for members. Do you want to go to this concert? Do you want to go to this theatre? Robert Rimmer, who is still in Palmerston North and quite well known as the director for Manawatu Theatre Society, he was supportive and he did deals for us to get cheap rates to go to some of his productions. An interesting thing in 1978 was the Sunday at Home afternoons that happened, which gave another venue for people to informally meet together. The car rallies started in 1978, and in 1978 they had 2 of them. They wanted a place for dances, so that ended up being held at Barry's Salon on a Saturday night. Started at 8 o'clock, finished at 1 o'clock, so that was at 12th Square as well. It was BYOG for everything, didn't have a liquor licence, and the very first couple people were expected to bring a plate, people didn't bring a plate, so what they decided to do was they wanted to feed people and not just have people drink. So there was a door charge introduced and food was provided, but you still had to bring your own grog. And there were lots of organised activities, dining out at the Albert Motor Lodge, Sunday buffet, Whanganui River Cruise were two outings that certainly happened over 1978 that I've seen from the newsletters. In terms of MaGRA camping in the outdoors, they started very early on, so at the end of December 1977 through to early January 1978, MaGRA went to join the Hawke's Bay Gay Society with their New Year camp in the outdoors at Herbertville. There was a pretty bad storm on the 3rd of January, all the tents blew down, so they packed up and left that evening. But the idea of camping out did not end. There was a proposal for a summer camp at Nelson from the end of December 1978 and for the first week in 1979. That fell through, but there was a replacement, and that was the Vinegar Hill Reserve camping out. And that happened from the 30th of December 1978 to the 6th of January 1979, and we now know that that began the annual Vinegar Hill New Year event. So that's how early it started, and you can see that camping out was a particular preoccupation with a number of the leadership of MaGRA, which quite a lot of us fell into line with. MaGRA got involved in welfare pretty early on, so you can see there that when I say early on, right from 1977, just continued into 1978, they compiled a list of supported doctors, lawyers, psychiatrists, counsellors. They organised an accommodation service for gays or lesbians either in the Manawatu, needed a place to stay, or coming to stay for the weekend. Broadway Books started stocking out Outing campaign, and that was organised by a MaGRA committee member going along to talk to them, so that happened from March 1978. May 1978, MaGRA was even helping out with courses on human sexuality at Massey University's psychology department, and also providing speakers to counsellors, Samaritans and Youthline. They did talkback radio for the first Gay Pride Week that they got active for in 1978. They even got a library set up, and it was 20 cents per book per fortnight. The public library was approached about a book display for Gay Pride Week in 1978. It was declined on those grounds that you can see that City Council policy does not allow any political type displays, and library staff could possibly be seen to be involved with the gay movement, so that fell through. But as I was saying to Ralph, a very important thing for a lot of gay men and lesbians was that somebody or some people in the Palmerston North City Library spent a lot of time searching out for books about same-sex relationships and got those purchased and got those through whoever checked the purchases. There were heaps of books on the City Council Library fiction shelves, and as one who religiously started at A, going to Z for the authors, looking at the title, deciding on the basis of the title whether it was worthwhile looking at the blurb, and that's how I discovered James Baldwin books, all in the library, Radcliffe Hall, W.H. Auden, and also Mary Renault. So I thank the person who was purchasing books for doing that for me, but for a lot of other gay men and lesbians that were living in the Manawatu. It's just so great. Okay. A newsletter got set up fairly early, so the first newsletter went out in October 1977, and the initial editors were Peter Pawson and Kevin Baston, and they had a problem getting the newsletter underway until Kevin had a solution, which was, it was rather difficult to know where to start, but after 5 gins we now were full of confidence and we got underway. That lasted till September 1978 when Ron Billington took over as the editor. But the newsletter had items of information, social calendar, but members were also invited to submit articles themselves, letters to the editor, recipes, knitting patterns, jokes, crossword puzzles, a whole range of things. terms of advertising started fairly early in 1978, so MaGRA was advertising in the Manawatu Evening Standard personal columns. It was happening once a week on a Thursday night. Those people who replied to the ad were followed up and assisted with whatever they needed in terms of coming to join a MaGRA meeting, being involved with MaGRA, or just dealing with being a member of the gay community, even if they didn't want to join the organisation. By March of 1978, they were getting about 3 replies per advert, which is not too bad going, and MaGRA itself in its newsletter also had classified advertising as well to help earn some more revenue for the organisation. MaGRA has got a proud record of helping the Wanganui Gay Rights Group and the Hawke's Bay Gay Society over 1977 and 1978. All 3 groups went to each other's social events, and there was that camaraderie that was built up between the 3 localities, the Hawke's Bay, the Manawatu and the Wanganui region. And the other interesting thing, and I didn't take part in it, but there was a Wanganui Bad Taste Party on Saturday the 24th of June 1978, but the more important thing is on the Sunday the 25th of June 1978, a small number of MaGRA members joined with the Wanganui Gay Rights Group to lay a wreath at the Sargent Gallery for the Wanganui Mayor Charles Mackay, who lost his job and got sent to prison for shooting another gay man because he was being threatened with blackmail. And the reason why I see the book up there by Paul Diamond and his book Downfall that was published at the end of last year, that is a really interesting book about Charles Mackay and the person who shot him, which was Darcy Creswell. A very, very interesting reading. Both men were definitely gay, and they are both prominent in New Zealand's history of the gay community. MaGRA has played its part in National Gay Rights Coalition, both regional conferences and national conferences. So that's the list of all the conferences that MaGRA participated in over the 1977 through to the 1978 period. And you can see that Palmerston North hosted the first couple of regional conferences. MaGRA certainly sent a large contingent to the national conference for the NGRC, the National Gay Rights Coalition, over Easter of 1978, and then the other regional conferences were held in Napier, Wanganui and in Wellington. Robin Duff visited Palmerston North on the 8th of April 1978, so he did have an informal meeting with 12 members at the Commercial Hotel where he talked about the NGRC, its aims and objectives, stated that the membership was 76,000, and Mike Ross has seen my PowerPoint and he said Robin was inflating the figures again as usual. Talked about the need for money and talked about the election campaign because 1978 was an election year. The Manawatu Evening Standard did do a press item about Robin's visit in the paper on Wednesday, 5th of April, and Robin did an interview with Brian Jennings on radio station 2ZA, which was just up the road here in George Street. It was broadcast, it was a 10-minute broadcast, and that was broadcast on Monday the 10th of April. Brian Jennings was so impressed by the interview that he actually sent it down to Wellington for broadcasting on the national program, but I don't know whether that happened or not. That's the last thing is the committee. 1977, as I said, the 20 or 30 of us just met, whatever was decided, people put their hands up, I'll do that, you do that, and we just got ahead and did things. But I said, you've got me to sort of hold things together, because I was still acknowledged as the leader, but it wasn't a benevolent dictatorship, it was very much a collective. I said, no, you've got a constitution coming up, and in the constitution it says you've got to have a committee. So the committee that was formed in 1977, just to see out the year, were those people. And of those people, Bruce is still here in the Manawatu, Bernard is still here in the Manawatu, Kevin and Peter are in Noosa, Pam McKenzie, unfortunately, another librarian who was very, very supportive, born the same year as my mother, so she was very much like a mother to me. Pam has passed away. The Constitution said that before the start of March, they had to have an AGM, so what was held was a special general meeting on the 1st of February, and that was the committee that was elected of 9 people. And when I saw those names again, it made me remember all of those 9 people were part of the group of 20 or 30 that were active in 1977. What's even more amazing is that Gilbert, Stephen and Peter, I knew. I was the youngest of the 4 of us, but we all knew each other by the end of 1959. I knew who they were, and I was the youngest. Gilbert and Peter were a year older than me, and Stephen was 4 years older than me. We all grew up in the same adjoining state housing streets in the Awapuni area, and our parents also knew each other. And I thought about that and thought, the 4 of us, and Stephen used to say there was something in the water in the Awapuni that caused us to be around, but all 4 of us worked together in 77. I left to go to Wellington to get my first job with my degree, and 3 people that I grew up with as a kid, we knocked around together, step up to be part of that committee of 9. I just think that's pretty amazing. I just think that's amazing. It's astounding. The other 6 people on the committee, Vernon is still alive, and Bernard is still alive in the Manawatu. He's Mr. Know-it-all for what the history is of this community, right from the 1950s onwards. He's a major resource. So of that committee of 9, 7 of them are still alive, but unfortunately Sharon Carline and Pam McKenzie died in the early 2010s. That group of 9 with me, we were all mates together for most of 77 and 78, and we'd been mates from 74, 75 onwards, so that's just an indication of camaraderie and the working together to make something continue and to be a success that MaGRA has been. I'd just like to acknowledge that Kevin Baston and Peter Pawson, they played a major key role from 1978 onwards. I knew them from Wellington Gay Liberation, and they moved up to the Manawatu. And the sort of activity they did in Wellington in terms of participating, they displayed in the Manawatu when they shifted up here. The other 4 people I'd like to recognise for 1978 and being always there to make sure that MaGRA did survive into the 1990s, 2000s. Eddie Johns, who is still alive, and his partner at the time, Adrian, and I'm not sure if Bill Armstrong is still alive, but also his partner, Howard, as well. Those 6 people came from Wellington. They came to the Manawatu to live, and they got stuck into being involved in MaGRA and played quite a leadership role for the organisation. I've spent quite a bit of time talking. I didn't really want to do too much about the Law Reform Bill campaign because I think that was covered quite adequately in the paper, and that's where I'd like to stop. If you've got any questions about the article that was in last Saturday's paper or anything I've covered in the early history of the Manawatu Gay Rights Association, the Manawatu Gay Rights Association, I think it's time that I stop so that you get the opportunity to ask a few questions.
Cindy.
Was it at great personal cost to Michael Ross to do this? I understand that the family are actually exclusive brethren and that he's no longer considered part of the family. In fact, he's the only one who's not considered part of the family now. So I take it he has been excommunicated, disfellowshipped.
I knew Michael's religious background. I haven't had too much contact with Michael until 2 or 3 years ago, and we've just picked up the relationship like that, despite that length of time. I know from what Michael has told me that he still has contact with his immediate family, still had time and had meetups with his mum. So I understand that things sort of did get a bit sorted out, but I mean, when he was appearing on TV, he actually came back to live with his mum in Rangatira Street, and I didn't hear anything from Mike during the time of our relationship when he was living in Palmerston North that there was any difficulties. So in terms of Michael, I gather that he still considers his family to be pretty important in his life, and that there's been the contact that one would expect to have with his extended family, to the extent that he is looking at coming back to the Manawatu at the end of this year, primarily to try and catch up with family that is still in the Manawatu. So you might know a bit more about that than I do.
Any more questions?
And apologies for lateness, so you might have covered this at the start and I was a couple of minutes late. I'm just intrigued by your motivation to do this history. It's really interesting. Curious about your motivation to it.
I know it's my life, and I know it's what was important to me. I've spent the last 2 or 3 years pondering this question. Why, after 1986, did I not get involved in AIDS issues? And I've not rationalised it, but what I've understood is my view was that from 86 onwards, because I was a union activist and left wing, the priority for me and a number of other members of our community was we need to fight Rogernomics, and we also need to fight euthanasia. That's what we put our energies into, saying to ourselves, there is enough other of our community to do the AIDS thing, but we need to be present in whatever actions, whatever movement there is to try and overturn neoliberal economic policies. A number of us ended up, obviously, with Jim Anderton's New Labour Party. We ended up in the Alliance Party. We all knew each other from activity in the gay liberation movements in localities throughout New Zealand. And to give you an example, one Sandy Gauntlet, who'd been active as one of the few trans people in the gay liberation movement, she also got involved in the Alliance for exactly the same thing, left wing, wanting to make a change. The reason why I've got motivated to follow up my history is because 2 years ago, Gavin Young, who is writing a book about the fight for law reform in New Zealand, right from what the Crimes Act had in it, how it affected our community, because yes, it directly affected gay men, but it also had serious implications for lesbians and trans. He contacted me to say, look, I'm writing this book. You were there involved in gay liberation a few years before me. You know these people personally. Can you please be the personal messenger from me to these people, for me to meet them, interview them for my book? So that was a deliberate decision by Gavin to say, look, can you smooth the way personally for me to contact people that I know are your friends, previous lovers and colleagues? So I did that for Gavin, and Gavin started farming work to me to do in terms of, can you research this person? Can you look up that person? And I did it readily because Gavin I'd known for 40 odd years. We flatted together at Wesley Road. And he's a friend of long standing, and I knew that he had a big job to do, so I basically said to him, and he agreed, if there's anything I can do that takes the load off you, that you don't need to do, then I'll do it. So that's what I've done for the last 2 years. And that's why I've got motivated, because the other thing is, and also Gavin's at fault as well. I gave him another idea for a book, and that idea was based on Tobin Lawson's and Randy Wicker's book, which was The Gay Crusaders, which came out in the 70s in the States. And I said to Gavin, a lot of the gay liberation members of 1972 to 74 in New Zealand are just going to be skeletons. They're just going to be names that people roll off the tongue, or they're going to be names that are in committee minutes or lists. And I said, I've got an idea for you to do a book which is either doing life histories of people that have died, and a lot of people have died, probably about 60% have died. The others that are still alive, we could do oral histories, and what we'd be looking at, what I suggested him to look at was, what was your upbringing like? When did you realise you were a member of the gay community, which was the term at the time? Why did you get involved in gay liberation? What's the motivation? What sort of things have you done since then? What sort of life have you led? And Gavin just turned it back to me and said, don't you think I've got enough to do getting this book written? It's the only time that a detailed history is going to be written on removing the Crimes Act and the fight for the removal of discrimination. So he said, you should do it, because you know the people anyway. So that's got me thinking about the history of the groups as well as starting to think about the people. And for me, as I said at the start, I'm interested in the individuals because these are people I know quite well, and they've been part of my life. They've made my life what it is now, where I am now. But I'm also interested in the organisations as well. So I did cover that at the start, why I covered individuals first, and saying that Palmerston North has got a pretty good track record in producing some people that were key to start things off.
It's obvious that your talk you've given has drawn upon quite a lot of archival material. Is that archival material from MaGRA lodged somewhere safely for the future?
In terms of the getting MaGRA set up and all that stuff from 1977, that's all stuff that I've retained. There's nothing in Lagans. In terms of the Homosexual Law Reform Bill campaign in the Manawatu, there's nothing in Lagans at all. It's all that I've kept. And what I didn't show you in the PowerPoint slides, there's far more than that. I've kept everything, all the letters that were written to people, the letters that came back from MPs, the list of people, organisations and people that we compiled that supported the bill that we then got involved in a campaign. I've got all that stuff, and my intention, and it's in my will, is that stuff will go to Lagans. What Lagans has got is the MaGRA newsletters, but I've noticed that there is a few gaps in the newsletters, and I've got some of those newsletters in my collection, which is not full by any means. So my talk was based on my material, conferring with Michael Ross and Kevin Baston and Peter Pawson to check my memory, and I've been quite happy to say that they've come back saying, yes, you're right, you're on the right track, and you've got the right names, especially with the surnames of people, and I just gave the first names of quite a lot of the people that are on the committees, for example. And I've managed to escape from school to go from one end of Wellington into town to go to National Library to look at the 1978 newsletters, because I didn't retain any of those, and that's what I used for a lot of the 1978 stuff. And I did come up to the Manawatu quite a bit in 1978 because my mother and father were still living. My grandmother was as well. So it was quite a lot of fun coming up here, meeting with people and going to the social functions that were on the Friday and Saturday night. So that's how I compiled the slide presentation and my talk.
Anyone else? Right. Shall we wrap things up?
Thanks very much for coming out tonight. I know that Friday is not a good night for coming out. It's the end of the week for most of us who are working full-time or even part-time, and especially at the hour of 6 o'clock when the last thing you want to do is go to a meeting and you just want to go home and put your feet up. So I appreciate you coming out tonight and for listening to me. Thanks very, very much.
Thank you, Vernon. That's a really fantastic session that you've shared with us this evening, and it's really lovely that we've been able to capture that too. It'll be going up on Manawatu heritage. So thank you. And thank you for coming this evening. And also, Heritage Month, there's lots of activities still going on, so please take one of the brochures away and have a look. Thank you.